Hello, and welcome back to our study of the book of Mark. Today we're going to try to cover all of Mark chapter 13. Now, throughout the last couple of chapters, Mark has focused his narrative on the happenings in the temple. You see, this section began when Jesus entered Jerusalem to the sounds of a cheering mob and what we call the triumphal entry. But in the end, he went into the temple, looked around, and said it was late, and left. So then there was the episode of the fig tree, and it was out of season and it didn't give fruit, so Jesus cursed it and it withered, right? And so this is a subtle indication that the time of the temple is coming to an end. And the temple was absolutely central to the Jewish worldview. The temple was the physical sign that God lived among them. It was so much the center of Jewish life that they saw the temple as the center of the world. And why not? That's where God communed with human beings, and they were the fortunate chosen people. So to speak against the temple and to say that its time is short was subversive, and it would have been shocking to any Jewish listener at that time. In the mind of the Jewish people, the destruction of the temple might as well be the end of the world. I mean, it was certainly the end of the world as they knew it, and they weren't feeling fine. But in chapter 13, Jesus is leaving the temple for the last time in his earthly ministry, and as he's leaving, one of his disciples comments on the magnificence of the temple. Oh, look how beautiful it is, right? And in a statement that harkens back to the curse of the fig tree, Jesus declares that not one stone will be left on another. The temple and its systems will be torn down. Of course, as disciples, they want to know when this will happen. Now, this chapter often confuses readers, and it is a difficult chapter, and we're going to have to wrestle with it. And I don't know that we'll come to a very satisfactory conclusion about everything. But this passage is multi-layered. Jesus is asked when this will happen, referring to the fall of the temple. And Jesus answers concerning both the temple and the end of the age, which, of course, as I said, in the minds of the Jewish people were linked. But modern readers tend to get caught up on this passage as predictors of the end times. But is that what Jesus really intended with what he was saying? Is that what Mark actually intended to convey to his readers? So we need to put ourselves in the shoes of Mark's readers. Mark was likely written between 66 and 70 AD. Those are the same years that the Jewish-Roman War were going, and they culminated in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. For the readers of the book of Mark, these happenings are current events. And the early church was a combination of both Jews and Gentiles, and they probably were wondering, what do these things we hear about happening over there in Jerusalem mean? I mean, Jerusalem was under siege by the Romans and then finally destroyed. Was this the end? Is Jesus coming back now? What does this mean? So let's read the passage together. Chapter 13, it says, As Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings. Do you see all these great buildings? Jesus replied. Not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled? Jesus said to them, Watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and deceive many. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginnings of birth pains. You must be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel must first be preached to all nations. Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given to you at that time. For it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and father and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house or take anything out. Let no one in the field go back to their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that this will not take place in the winter, because those will be days of distress unequaled from the beginning, when God created the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, whom he has chosen, he has shortened them. At that time, if anyone says to you, "Look, here's the Messiah," or "Look, there he is," do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So be on your guard. I have told you everything ahead of time. But in those days, following that distress, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. But about that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. So what causes problems for readers is that Jesus predicts many things that happened exactly as he said they would within 40 years of the time that he said it. But he also talks about the day of his return, and they seem to be linked together. Jesus says that all of these things will happen within one generation. And while we can say for sure much of it did, clearly he has not come in glory in the second coming yet, so Jesus must have been wrong about this. And, we aren't sure we can trust him. But before we get into that, we need to ask, what is the purpose of this discussion? Jesus was predicting the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and the disciples asked when these things would happen. So the focus of the speech is on this specific event, and all of the things related to it actually happened in the period of that generation. So when you were reading, you might have noticed that much of what he described was really actually just the way it was for Christians in the early days of the church, kind of like what's described in the book of Acts or in church history. So Mark's readers would have been very familiar with persecution for their faith in Jesus. The Roman Empire was very hard on Christians, and many were betrayed by their families and friends and were brought before the authorities. And one thing to remember is that not all of the Christians who faced persecution stood firm. There were many who recanted their faith. So some people recanted and they just succumbed to the pressure of the persecution. And of course, there were others who were misled by false teachings and false messiahs. So the focus of Jesus in this speech is not so much giving details about when the temple will be destroyed or when he will return. The focus is on how Christians should react to the situations around them. Be on your guard. There will be false teachers. Don't follow them. Stand firm in the faith. There will be wars. Don't be worried about it. These things are going to happen, and they aren't signs of the end. They're just the reality that we live in. So stand firm. The same's true for famines or earthquakes. Don't let them turn you against God. Stand firm in the faith. You will face persecution. You will be put on trial. But use these opportunities to be witnesses. And you don't have to worry about what to say. The Holy Spirit will give you the words. And that is good advice all the time, in every generation. So we don't have to worry about having the right thing to say in every situation. We have the Holy Spirit. So follow His lead. Now, none of these things should cause Christians to panic or to lose their faith. However, when speaking of Jerusalem, there was a time when they needed to get out. And when is that? That's when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong. When you see that, get out. And there's been a lot of talk over the centuries about what this means. And it's a reference to the prophet Daniel. But it's interesting to me that the Jewish historian Josephus, who actually was alive during this period and was very much involved in the happenings, he said that the abomination was when the Roman general Titus entered the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and tore it down. So, if you go back to the Old Testament, you know that the holiest place, the Holy of Holies, was off limits to everyone except the high priests, who once a year went through a cleansing ceremony and then went in to offer sacrifices on behalf of the people. The Holy of Holies was considered the throne room of God. So, for an unclean Gentile who hasn't been purified to walk in and tear everything down, that would certainly be an abomination. Now in Luke, it reads a little bit differently. He says, when you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, you should flee to the hills. So it seems that these armies surrounding Jerusalem and the abomination that causes desolation, they're connected to one event. And so that's why I think that him entering the Holy of Holies is probably what that was. And so when they saw the enemies surrounding Jerusalem, when they saw the armies, when they saw these things happening, what were they supposed to do? They were supposed to flee. So what's interesting about this is that when this all happened in, from 66 to 70 AD, when this was going on, there was a huge slaughter of Jews. When the Romans sacked Jerusalem, over 1 million Jews were killed. However, pretty much no Christians were killed. Well, why? Because the Christians had been warned by Jesus. They recognized these signs and they got out. They were in other places. So they had listened to Jesus. So you see a very real application of what he said. So the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem is a huge event in history. And it was all going on at the time that Mark was writing this gospel. And not to mention that throughout the Roman Empire, there was a lot of persecution happening. So all of this was very relevant to Mark's first readers. I think we can clearly say that everything related to the temple, as mentioned in this passage, did actually happen within that generation. But what do we do with statements about his return? Do we just say that Jesus was wrong? Well, obviously I would have a problem with saying Jesus was wrong. But to me, what makes it more strange is that Jesus is clearly right about everything happening in the passage. So this implies that he had a supernatural knowledge of what was going to happen, or he just made a lucky guess. But you don't make these kind of lucky guesses with that much detail. So the content and the context of the book of Mark would definitely imply that Jesus knew what he was talking about, right? So I think we would have to say that Jesus had supernatural knowledge, and we don't. So I think when we're looking at this passage and we kind of think there's a problem with it, I think we're the ones with the problem, not him, because he has the supernatural knowledge. So the events of 70 AD, they changed everything. It was a huge event. If you go to Rome, near the Colosseum, when you get in, going into the Roman Forum, there is a big arch called the Arch of Titus, and on it you can see still 2,000 years later carvings that describe the sack of Jerusalem. So It was a huge thing. And before this, what's interesting is that Christians were seen as a Jewish sect. But after this, Christianity is thought of as its own thing, separate from Judaism. So it seems like there was a generational shift at this point. We also need to recognize that this passage has a lot of apocalyptic language. And that's the same style of writing as the book of Revelation. And in apocalyptic language, there are many symbols and visual pictures that require interpretation. So like in Revelation, much of what was written were things that the readers were actually experiencing, and then it was written with these symbols. But it also has applications for the future. And so I think we need to think the same way about this passage, that it had a direct, immediate application. And we do have to think about what the symbols mean. So when Jesus quotes the Old Testament about the scriptures falling and the sun being darkened, this is an apocalyptic symbolism that represents God's judgment. Now, at the beginning of this section, I said that prophecy is often multi-layered. It has a fulfillment now sometimes and a fulfillment later sometimes. All of these things were fulfilled in this time except for his coming. But in the context of this passage, his coming is talking about him coming in judgment on the temple. So it may be that he's talking about his coming judgment, which will be glorious. And all of this that's happening to the temple is part of God's judgment against a temple system that has rejected God. You know what? Anyway, this is really a difficult passage. It's okay to wrestle with it. But I think we can clearly see that Jesus was completely right about everything that happened to the temple, which is what they were asking about in the first place. Now, as for the second coming, there's a lot we don't understand. So, what is this passage saying for us today? What's a call for faithfulness to God in difficult situations? All these things that Mark speaks about, they're constant realities. They're realities in every generation. We still have wars. We still have false teachers. We still have persecution. We still have family conflicts over the faith. And through it all, we're called to remain faithful to God. We're called to stand firm and endure to the end. We're called not to live in fear. We're called to testify faithfully of Jesus. We're called to take the gospel to all nations. What was true in that generation is true for us today. This passage is a call for each generation to remain faithful to God through every difficulty. And that seems to be the message that the disciples and the original readers of Mark got out of this passage.